Godin Notebook. BasuandGodin 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 Notebook.
Well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook. I am Marc-Antoine Godin with Arpin Basu. Arpin, we have been doing this for 7 years, and I'm not sure if I've ever been as excited or as jittery to start an episode than today's episode.
Well, you've got a lot on your plate, I think, today. So Marc-Antoine, so that everyone knows, is now our producer as well as being a co-host. So
Yeah,
there's a lot riding, everybody. I'm counting on you, but I'm sure it'll be great. So welcome to our new platform. Here we are, BasuandGodin.com. What is it? The third or the fourth different? We started on SoundCloud.
yes.
Then we went to...
Yeah, we started on SoundCloud, and we dug the other day an episode, our very first episode from 2017, which we recorded in the car. We were on the way to Buffalo, where the Canadians were starting their season. So it gave us the idea that maybe down the road we should rekindle with that format. We'll see if we can do that, but it might not be visual if we ever do this. I don't know. But we started on SoundCloud, then we moved on the Athletic app.
Yeah.
And
then SDPN, obviously, and as if obviously we had to leave them. If you haven't watched our final episode on their platform, you can get the explanation for why that is the case, which is why we're here now on Substack /BasuandGodin.com. And so here we are. And we actually this reminds me of another episode where I was in Chicago, and all day you were waiting for me to arrive in Chicago. And today, all day you've been waiting for me to arrive from Boston to do this episode. So a lot of throwbacks for us, but yeah, here we are. We're ready to talk. The Canadians have played 2 games. The season is underway, and so it's exciting. It's exciting, and at the same time, I think there's some overreactions happening already. There's all sorts of hysteria happening already. We should preface everything we're going to say in this episode by saying it's been 2 games. There's 2 games against the Toronto Maple Leafs, legitimate, not only playoff contender, but they consider themselves a Stanley Cup contender, and a Boston Bruins team that is in that same category of teams. Bubble Stanley Cup contender, but definite playoff contender, and the Canadiens are not in that category yet. So everything we've seen and everything we're going to say so far, I think, has to be painted with that brush. That starting a season back-to-back home opener against the Leafs in Boston the next day. I looked it up last night. They haven't won in Boston since 2019.
No, they won. I think they won 1 game out of the last 15 against the Bruins.
Yeah, they won 1 game. That was at home, so they haven't won in Boston in a very long time, and that continues after Thursday night.
Yeah,
but there are some things, I guess, that have come up over these 2 games that, apart from the difficulty of the teams they were facing and the circumstances they were in, do lend themselves to more discussion of what this means for the season as a whole. And without getting too hyperbolic about it, we should start with what's going on the blue line.
Yeah, because I think that we've seen a lot of things during those 2 games, and we could talk all day long about the defensive play as a whole of this team, because they've leaked chances first against the Leafs, and then on Thursday in Boston, they had all sorts of troubles in their own end. But I think that if we focus more specifically on the blue line, it's interesting considering the personnel that's at their disposal, and especially the changes that were made during the game by Martin St. Louis. First, there's one thing that's right from the start that is striking to me, It was, you could argue that it's a visible change from what we've seen from Martin St. Louis so far. The whole line shuffling and defensive duo shuffling, that's something that was common, among his predecessors. But it's not something that Martin St. Louis did a whole lot since he's behind the bench. All these changes suggest that he was coaching in order to get back in the game. And,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily to let a young team live the experience of the situation that they were in right at that moment and try to figure out ways to climb out of the hole. So he identified the guys who were going, those who were not, and he made changes in order to come from behind. So it was really striking. So it might seem obvious for the vast majority of coaches, but in the way that he is coaching in a rebuilding team, it's not something that we saw from him too often. So very early on in the season, I think there's a shift there. But yeah, so there were changes because there are some guys that were really not going well, and others that needed all the ice time that they could take. Let's start with the positive for a second and enjoy how comforting the play of Lane Hutson is. There were still some question marks around the fact that will he be able to sustain like the maybe not necessarily the rigors of a season, because we don't know yet. But I mean, it's a tough lineup on the other side in both with Boston and Toronto, and he's played over 20 minutes, 22 I think against Boston. He was their best defenseman. He was the only one who, I mean, he had the puck so often on his stick that's one of the big reasons. What they say that the best way to defend is to make sure that the other team doesn't have the puck. Well, Hutson made a clinic out of that, so he was rarely in trouble in his own end. And when he was paired with Caden Gooley, it was a very, very enjoyable pair to look at. And Gooley seems, even though he missed pretty much all of training camp, looks like he did not miss a beat. And he's ready to take his career to take another step this season. He looks like the older guy on that pair already. He looks like the veteran. So there had to be some changes made, but among all the changes that were made, at least that pair is something that you can really build on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should discuss, because Marty, when he was after the game, when he talked about the forward changes, and I agree with you that we haven't seen it from him too often, but when we have seen it from him in the past, we'll see what happens on Saturday. But when he shuffled his forward lines in the past, with Michel Therrien, for instance, when we saw that, and if Thursday night scenario played out with Michel Therrien as coach, I could guarantee that the line combinations that finished the game on Thursday would start the game on Saturday.
For sure.
That has been the case with Martin St. Louis. He does tend to go back to his original lines, and it's really and this is how he explained it after the game in Boston. It's really an attempt in that game to optimize your forward lines and give more ice time to the guys you think are going. And in last night's but Thursday night's case in Boston, that was Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher. But it's on defense, there was something more, I guess, profound going or meaningful, I think, in the sense that, he said that since we're on the road and they have Pasternak and Marchand on separate lines, it's difficult for us to get the matchups we want. He can't come out and say it so bluntly, but I asked him specifically about the Arbor Jackeye Justin Barron pairing, how the new blue line combinations, which was Matheson, Barron, Savard, Jackeye, Hutson, Gooley, allowed him to give each of those guys support on their pairing. And didn't really deny that, and, said they have their good games or so-so games, but I think they're okay out there. He's not going to blast them publicly. I think that was kind of an admission on his part that that's really kind of what's going on there. So that's something significant, because he felt by splitting up Matheson and Gooley, it allows to have one of them on the ice more often when you don't know who's coming over the boards on the other side. Now, is he going to change? Is he going to flip flop home and away with that concept? Maybe, I don't know. But the two games, well, the one game and one period, basically, we saw the Jacky Barron pairing suggested that something had to change there.
Yeah.
And the fact that Jacky wound up with Savard, who was previously in the role of, no offense to Lane Hutson, but babysitting Lane Hutson, and oftentimes David Savard is the guy who is given the task of holding a young defenseman's hand in some way. You know, he's kind of the guy that the coaching staff trusts to help a younger defenseman. In this case, the fact that he was put with Jacky suggests that Jacky is the guy that needed that support. And Hutson had, as you mentioned, had already shown enough to not require, although, you know, playing with Gouli is probably an upgrade, frankly. But I think he's shown that he can kind of go out there and walk and run even, doesn't need to have his hand held. But Arber Xhekaj and Justin Barron, who I thought looked better playing with Mike Matheson, both of them, I think, need some hand holding right now. And that's an issue for this team, especially with Jaden Struble out for the first couple of games. We don't know what's going to happen on Saturday in terms of his availability, but, you know, you wouldn't think that the entire plan on defense would kind of crumble because Jaden Struble was injured.
Yeah, well, you know, all of a sudden, you know, they traded Kovacevic, they traded Harris, Struble is injured, and Reinbacher is out for the year pretty much. Not that he would have started in Montreal, but I think that he might have been an option down the road if things went well for him in Laval. So that depth on defense is all of a sudden very thin, and you have to count on at least 6 guys who are going to be effective. And what we've seen so far, I mean, Arber Xhekaj didn't have a very good training camp when he was on the ice. You could see it, you know, right off, starting from the scrimmages in Brassard. And now, I mean, he was in Boston, obviously, was just not his own only his own doing, but he was a -3 after 2 periods with less than 8 minutes of ice time.
I'd say two of those goals were kind of directly on him, in some way, shape, or form.
And then he had 3 shifts in the third period, and the first one of those, I mean, he was caught flat foot in his own blue line, and, you know, Charlie Coyle blew by him, and thank God for Caden Primo, but he hit the crossbar.
Oh, right. I was thinking of another instance where it was Cole Koepke.
Okay.
Cole Koepke, who walked around Arber Xhekaj and got to Caden Primo's net. Primo made a nice pad save, and then Kastelik later beat him with a shot that he probably should have had. But, you know, when you see Xhekaj getting beat on the rush, I'm going to admit I had to look up Cole Koepke after that play.
Yeah.
With all due respect to Cole Koepke, he's been a professional player for a long time. He's a 6th round pick of the Tampa Bay Lightning, new to the Bruins. You know, had a goal and 2 assists in that game. But, you know, that's the line that really hurt him. John Beecher, Cole Koepke, Mark Kastelik, their 4th line were +3. And they did a lot of that damage against that Jacky Barron pairing. And so, you know, it's all good for Martin to say, you know, when Pasternak and Marchand are on 2 different lines, but really they were getting the matchup they wanted, more or less, for those guys playing against that 4th line. And that 4th line had, you know, ate their lunch. You know, like it was not good. So,
yeah, but those minutes, if you don't give them to Xhekaj, and Savard was ended up playing only 13 minutes. I think it's his lowest ice time in a Montreal Canadiens uniform. The result is that Mike Matheson, who's accustomed to playing big minutes, played 26 minutes. So it looks almost like a normal day at the office for him. The issue is that he was not having a good game himself. So if you have your top pairing guy who's thriving and he's, you know, things are going well for him, you don't mind giving him that much ice time. But on a night where you could really use an alternative and somebody else will say, okay, well, you know, maybe it's not exactly your night. You know, it's you had your hands full against the Leafs. Maybe tonight, if we could keep it to 21, 22, that'd be great. When you have your third pairing, who's basically, that just stays on the bench in the third period, and Jack was barely playable before that. It's problematic because you just run out of options so quickly that it puts the whole defense behind the 8 ball.
Yeah. And, it bears mentioning that while the defense will one day probably be the strength of this team, it's not yet. In fact, it's probably its biggest weakness is on defense. It's young, it's raw, it's green. Matheson and Savard are the only two true veterans, even though Caden Gooley is playing like one right now, but he's not a veteran yet. And after the game, he was, I got to say, was the one guy who looked at that game as a veteran. He came out and was like, we're being too cute with the puck. We're all trying to make plays with the puck. We're turning it over. We're not putting it deep. We're not playing a simple game. We just played last night. We're on a back-to-back. We're physically tired. We're mentally tired. We haven't played the way that you should under those circumstances. Simplify the game, all these things. He said all the right things because he meant them and he felt them. A really good line he had was, we got to get pucks deep. We got to play deep. I know they're cliches, but that's what good teams do. That's what winning teams do. Like, basically, without saying it, he's like, they're cliches for a reason. They're cliches because if you do those things and you repeat it all the time. And last year, we often heard there was a period of time where Martin St. Louis was really hung up on the team's forecheck. And they worked on it over a period of a week or so, where it was like every game, every practice, they were really on top of it. And then eventually he was kind of imploring his team to trust their forecheck, to give the forecheck a chance to be effective instead of making that extra little play with the puck or trying to beat a man one-on-one or what have you. Just get it in, go after it. And you don't want to play that way every game. And I don't think Martin St. Louis wants to play with like that every game. But this was a circumstance where you needed to do that. And since they weren't doing that, the puck was coming back at that defense with great frequency, and was spending a lot of time in their end.
Well, because the Bruins were doing that. The Canadians were killed by strong forecheck, by long cycling that confused them in their assignments, and they were killed by prolonged shifts and by Bruins players who eventually were left alone in the high slot.
Yes, and so that's not only on the actual defenseman. That's a team thing, and that's something Martin St. Louis wanted to address from day one of training camp. They've made changes in their defensive zone structure. They're trying to, snuff out the slot area better. They're trying to keep a man in the slot area to make sure they don't give up chances from that spot like they did often last year. The high slot doesn't really fall into that. They're really looking at the house or the home plate area. So that's, the Bruins were setting up consistently above the circles and in that area, which doesn't technically count as the house. So, but yeah, it's all this to say that it's not yet a strength. There's a lot of young guys on this defense. Strubble's a young guy in this defense. And I look at this season. This season is about a lot of things. It's about development. It's about taking a step. It's about progression, but it's also about gathering information. There's so many guys in this organization that management don't really know what they have. I think Jack still falls under that category. I think Barron definitely falls under that category. Hutson falls under that category to a far lesser extent, but to some tiny extent, Gooley falls under that category. Kapanen, Heineman, there's all sorts of Doc. I mean, there's even Linewood before he got hurt. There's all these guys that management wants to see what they are so that they can identify the holes that they need to fill using all the assets that they've gathered over the last 3 years. So, this game, there's information coming out of these two games. And it's so far for Barron and Jack, and I would argue for Jack in particular, it's not good information. And in Jack's case, the information has been very mitigated from the start of training camp. I mean, I think they like the fact that he's able to play that sheriff role and be
Sure.
sort of their bodyguard. Who doesn't like that? Everyone likes that. But I think his defensive game is still very much a big time work in progress. And these 2 games and the preseason, what little he played of it, even the scrimmages, are suggesting that he still has a lot of work to do on his defensive game. Now, that could change. He could start improving from this point. That was maybe a low point for him. Canadians have to hope so.
Yeah.
But Jaden Struble, were he not hurt, I think it's pretty clear that he would have played in these 2 games as opposed to Arbor Jack.
Well, he will play against the Ottawa Senators on Saturday if he's healthy enough. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, but you mentioned that the Canadians are a young team. The stats, the average ages were released by the NHL following opening the rosters. The Canadians have the 2nd youngest team in the NHL.
Yeah, but that includes Carey Price.
No, it does not.
Oh, it does not.
No, it does not.
But he was on the season opening roster.
Yeah, but it doesn't calculate guys that are on IR. So it was yeah, no, it doesn't include Price. But the thing is that on defense, the Canadians have the youngest blue line in the league at 24.7 years old. The Buffalo Sabres are second at 24.9, and the New York Rangers and Anaheim Ducks are tied at 26 years old on the dot. So the Canadians are in the 3rd year of their rebuild. They wanted to see growth last year. Now they want to be in the mix this year, but there's still this little wrinkle of them having the youngest blue line in the league, being in the 3rd year of their rebuild. So to me, it's a bit of an issue. And I look at, if we are to discuss defensive mishaps and the fact that they sometimes look disorganized in their own end, their young defensemen, for the most part, are not necessarily primarily defensive defensemen. Hutson obviously is known for his offensive acumen, but Justin Barron was seen more as a transition guy, good skater, but not necessarily like a defensive stalwart. You just brought up Arbor Jackeye. In the pipeline, Logan Mailloux is offensive defenseman. Adam Engstrom is an offensive defenseman. They probably only have Reinbacher, who could fit the profile of being a guy who's primarily a steady guy in his own end.
True.
And Struble. But
Yeah.
is Struble going to be a difference maker down the line? I don't know. But my point is, if you remember a conversation we had last season on this very podcast, I brought up the idea of Brett Pesce, and I remember you said, "What? What are you talking about? The Canadians have a ton of defensemen." But I wonder if, since they have so many, they're already so young, and they're only going to get younger because David Savar's contract is ending at the end of the season. Mike Matheson, I don't know how many years he's going to stay in Montreal, but he's also another guy who's more like offensively inclined. Will they be able to get anywhere a guy that you can trust for 22, 23 minutes and say that guy is going to be a stabilizing factor in our own end? Kaden Guhle is going to be that guy. But if you want to have stability in the defensive territory, I think that they need to find somebody. If it's not one of their younger guys, they'll probably have to go look on the market next summer and see, well, maybe that's where we should spend our money now that, the dreams of Sidney Crosby and Leon Draisaitl are dead. Maybe that the difference makers up front might be down the list very quickly. So I don't know. It's it's a steady guy in defense that could be helpful for that group.
Brett Pesce got 6 years at $5.5 million a year from the Devils, right?
Okay.
I can almost guarantee the Canadians wouldn't have been willing to give him that contract. So that's the tricky part is that you're basically describing a stopgap guy, right? You're describing a bridge guy to get to when their young defense is mature.
No, I'm talking about casting. I'm talking about the fact that they're young guys. Even when they're mature, it's the style of player that they are.
Well, I think
And
if you have Gooley, Reinbacher, and Struble, that's half your defense core, and 3 of them play that style.
well, Reinbacher, before he's able to be like that stabilizing factor after a lost season, it's going to be 3 years from now. So call it a stopgap as much as you want. But if you sign a guy for, let's say, 4 years, it's not exactly a stopgap. I'm not talking about signing a guy for 8 years, but it's.
But to get guys
it's
like
not a
Pesce,
plug
and
for
this
a year
is
or
the same.
two.
It's the same argument we had when you first brought it up. Is that you have to give. I mean, Pesce has 6 years. He's got a no trade clause for the first 3 of those years, and he's got a modified no trade clause for the last 3 of those years. So it's like it's tough to go on the market. I mean, we saw the reason the Canadiens struck out on the free agent market this year is they weren't willing to go past a certain time frame, and this is kind of, and this is exactly why the Reinbacher injury is so bad for him, in the sense that you have a lost season. You would hope that within 2 years he would have been ready to kind of play that role. Now, yeah, I agree. It might be 3 because he hasn't played this year. So I don't know if they have to go out and get something else. I don't know to what point they're willing to do that, but I agree with you that they do lack a stabilizer, because right now their number one stabilizer is Mike Matheson, and he's a bit volatile as a stabilizer. He's not always all that stable. It's like
He's never been a stabilizer. He's an exciting guy. He can log a lot of minutes, but he's not the guy that say, "Oh, he brings the temperature down in your own head."
And that's the role he's played last year, and that's the role he's so far playing this year.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it should be said, like, yes, he takes risks. Yes, he turns the puck over occasionally, but considering the number of minutes he plays and considering how often the puck is on his stick, I don't think he does those things nearly as often as people blame him for. He has many, many opportunities to turn the puck over. It's going to happen. Defensemen who have the puck on their stick a lot always turn it over a lot. Erik Karlsson, even in his prime Norris Trophy winning years, did that. I'm not comparing Mike Matheson to Erik Karlsson, but the role Roman Josi does that. If when you have that, and Lane Hutson is probably going to do that for the Canadiens at some point. He's gonna have turnovers. He's gonna have mistakes. You can't, when you have a risk, you have an element of risk in your game. You're gonna make mistakes. But I can see your point. I don't know what the answer is to it, frankly. I mean, you even look at Joel Edmondson. Joel Edmondson got 4 years at 3.85 on the free agent market.
Insane.
Exactly. But that's the kind of contract you have to give out to get the guy that you're describing. And you have to give out a mistake contract, basically.
Well, yeah. I don't know about that. I don't know to which extent. It depends on the needs of every team and who's in a situation to bid.
Well, you described a guy who played 22 to 23 minutes without giving you headaches. I mean, those guys,
Gavrikov,
those guys get paid.
Guys like Gavrikov, for example,
they get paid. And so it's because there's value. You're saying that the Canadiens need that because it's a valuable position on the team. So the problem for the Canadiens in all of that, looking down the road, is they have to save money for players that they don't know whether they will even want to re-sign, but they don't know what tier of player they will be. Poster child being Kirby Dach. Like, they have to save money for Kirby Dach's next contract, not having any clue what that could be, what that will look like. And so, that's what I went back to saying. That's what their information gathering mode in 2026, or perhaps as recently as this summer, I believe they could sign him. I mean, it's, they got to know what kind of contract Dach's going to be worth.
Yeah.
And until they know that, they can't add pieces like you just described. When they know that they have that money to spend, then
dude, they already signed up all of their first line long term. I think that it's not mutually exclusive, that you can find money for Kirby Dach's next contract and find yourself a good defenseman who's a veteran. You know, there, especially with the cap going up, they should have the resources. If there's a team that will have the financial flexibility to do that, and I can't believe that I brought up free agency 2025 after game 2, but here I am. I did it.
Yeah.
But no, he's just looking at what they've got and what they're missing. And, you know, you say I think that's something that I don't see the Canadians. Yeah, we could see growth from Barron defensively over the course of the season, maybe from Jacky. I like Struble. I'm a pro Jaden for sure. But I think that group of defensemen, as it's currently shaped, can only go so far in becoming a staunch defensive group. And I think that bit more, especially when Savard will be gone, they will need a veteran presence and a stabilizer in their group. That's pretty much all I'm saying.
Okay. I'm just saying that it's hard to find those guys at contracts that this team is willing to give out. We'll stick to that.
Well, to quote Stéphane Rabida earlier this week and Jeffrey Laurier from a few years ago, why not us? Why not now?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Boy, he got a lot of answers to those questions there in the 2 games since. It's like, yeah. Why not us? Let me count the ways. Anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you brought up Mike Matheson. Do you want to discuss the power play now? Because he's been a target. He's been a target. He's been a target, and obviously with Hutson being dynamic on second unit that produced a goal. Brendan Gallagher scored against the Bruins, and frankly, that second unit looked better than the first against the Bruins
in both games, not just against the Bruins. In both games.
Well, at least Caulfield scored against the Leafs, but you're
that
probably
was the
right
one time the power play 1 looked good. That was the only time. Yes, it produced a goal, but in terms of zone time and moving the puck and being effective as a power play unit, I think power play 2 is, and the argument can be made it's because Hudson's on it, which I think is the argument for keeping him there. You know, I mean, I understand Matheson's, he's not the only one. Listen, Nick Suzuki's not been great through 2 games. Slav has not been great through 2 games. Caulfield has the goals, but that power play unit has not been sharp. It's not just about Mike Matheson, and it's not just about putting Lane Hutson on that unit. There's a lot going on power play 1 that are non-Matheson issues. I understand that he's the flashpoint because everyone wants to see Lane Hutson on the first power play. I have no doubt in my mind at some point this season we will see Lane Hutson on the first power play. But right now, you know, Nick Suzuki drew that tripping penalty in Boston. They had been on the ice for about a minute and change at that point, meaning Suzuki, Slafkovsky, and Coffin. But penalty gets called, TV timeout. You have 3 minutes to rest up.
Yeah.
They come out of that TV timeout and power play 2 is on the ice. And so that was a message sent to power play 1, hasn't been good enough. But B, Marty showing that he's going to play that card. It would be inconceivable, no matter how bad the power play 1 had been last season, that they would come out of a TV timeout on the bench. Now, with power play 2 having shown viable attack time, puck movement, creativity, with far less talent, and a lot of that is because Lane Hudson's there and creates a lot of space. I mean, that pass to Armia before he sent it to Gallagher for the tip-in was brilliant. The one thing about Hutson that I've noticed that I hadn't noticed before, just as an aside, sorry, because he has the puck on his stick so often, and because he often has the puck on his stick for a long time, I find the longer he has the puck on his stick, the more guys on the ice start looking at him. Opponents, I mean. Opposing defenders. He draws the attention of more and more guys as his puck time increases, which allows other guys to lose coverage, get open, and he invariably finds it. In that situation, 3 out of the 4 Bruins on the ice were looking right at Hutson and to see what he was going to do. He found a seam, found Armia, who found another seam, and they were all kind of late. Now, it should be clear that the other reason the Bruins were kind of out of sorts on that play was, Marchand kind of left his assignment to level Alex Newhook in the neutral zone, and that had the Bruins kind of chasing as a result. But Hutson took advantage of that. So, I don't know. I think having a dangerous power play 2 is important to this team, and that's a big part of why Patrick Laine's injury was so painful for them, because they really wanted him to be the main threat on that unit. And Joel Armia, while he has an excellent shot, does not have a shooting mentality the way Laine does. But I think having Hutson on power play 2 helps the team. And power play 1 needs to figure a lot of things out, that it's not just Mike Matheson.
No, generally, I mean, the passes are not very crisp.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Caulfield's movement. I think that he's less static. He's trying to open himself more. I like what I see from Caulfield. I think that Slavkovsky is a non-factor right now in the power play. Suzuki was I thought he was a bit more comfortable or more visible against Toronto than against Boston, but they're just not sharp. And the 6-on-4
passes hit a lot of sticks.
Yeah, but the 6-on-4 at the end of the game was abysmal.
Yes, it was. And that was the one time Hutson got on the ice with those guys, was that 6-on-4.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not, I'm not blaming Hutson, but still, it was power play 1 plus Lane Hutson for that 6-on-4, but the early part of that 6-on-4. But yeah, I find power play 1 has been very predictable to defend. There was one instance, the puck was in the corner. Can't remember if it was Doc or Suzuki who sent it out to the point, and Brad Marchand was waiting for it. Like, he just went and he was just waiting, and the puck just came to him out of the zone. Like, he knew what they were going to do. And it's been happening quite often where their pucks are hitting, their passes are hitting sticks, they're getting broken up, they're predictable. And the thing about that unit is it's been completely constructed to be unpredictable. If you watch them practice, which I know most of our listeners don't, but we do, and when power play 1 goes out in practice, the first rep, Doc's in the bumper, Slav's on the goal line, Suzuki's in the left circle, Caulfield's on the right, and then the next rep, Caulfield's in the left circle, Suzuki's on the right, and Doc's on the goal line, and Slav's in the bumper, and so it's based on movement and it's based on unpredictability, and right now, it's extremely predictable.
Or it's too predictable for them. So
well, that's what I mean. It's too predictable for the opponent, is what I mean. It's usually as predictable as your teammates can predict what you're going to do, but I think their opponents are too easily prepared to predict what they're going to do.
Yeah. So but I agree. It's not necessarily Matheson's fault. It's not. You cannot pin it on him. But the fact is, with Laine being down, if at some point they want to look at a way to change things up and see how they can improve that power play, I don't expect that any of the 4 forwards we see there would be demoted to power play 2 in favor of another forward that's currently on that second unit.
I would counter that. I would counter that by saying, instead of looking at it as a demotion, maybe one of those forwards would be promoted to power play 2, in the sense that you've done well, the rest of these guys have been bad. I'm going to put you on the unit that works.
Right. And
that might happen at some point. But right now, none of the guys on power play 1 have been really all that effective. So
yeah, but Arpin, at the same time, if the second unit works mainly because of Hutson, and the PP1 doesn't work,
I think
over a stretch of 7-8 games or whatever it is, you're going to say, well, the guy that makes it work on PP2, we'll bring him to PP1 because it's more important that our main guys work.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think for now, they're gonna give power play 1 a bit more time. I know that people are desperate to see Hutson with those guys. I am too, frankly. I mean, I think the potential is great. But I think he's going to get a bit more time. Marty didn't. I asked him this question. When was it? Tuesday. What did he say? It was a very brief answer. It was, well, it's a lot of responsibility and Mike's body of work. That was it. He said, I'll say that. So I think he's aware. He knows that he didn't want to say too much. Usually he like expands. He'll if he wants to talk about something, he will. He didn't want to talk about that because I think it's obvious to him. Obviously, it is obvious to him that you have this guy who's a real difference maker on the power play. And the one interesting thing, and I talked to Matheson about this, is that Matheson is a relatively recent power play player.
Yeah.
Last year is like the first time his time in Montreal is the first time he's ever been a power play guy in the NHL since college. So he's kind of learning. And Lane Hutson's been on power plays his entire life, not at the NHL level, but how a power play works is innate to him. It's part of his DNA. He's done it forever. So
I think at the hospital when he was born, Lane Hutson, when he was born at the hospital, it was a 5-on-4 situation.
Yeah.
He was there.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's true. There's a change there, and probably that Matheson. I mean, we both asked him about that, so he knows that the discourse is already out there. He sees a Hutson play too, so there's an internal threat that there is now that wasn't there before. So and he would be also totally legitimized to say, wait a minute, how many points did I rank up last year over 60 something points? I had offensively the best season of my career, and I'm going to be second guessed, at the season start because the power play has not been working during preseason.
Yeah, and eighth in power play points by a defenseman in the NHL.
Yeah, that's it. So,
but he did say, to his credit, I don't know. We spoke to him separately, which probably made it worse. But he did say, like, I just want to win at this stage of my career. I just want to win hockey games, and frankly, I'm not going to get in the way of anything that will allow us to win more games. So, what he was saying is that if Lane Hutson makes our team better and gives us a better chance of winning, I'm not going to be the one to stand in his way, for this role. Like, he just wants, so I think he's prepared for that happening at some point. It would be impossible not to. I mean, this is just the reality of the NHL. Talented players arrive all the time. Older players get moved off of roles because the young talented player is better suited for that role. I have no doubt in my mind it will happen at some point. I just think Marty's going to be more patient with that top unit and give it a chance to figure things out. And frankly, I think he should, because if they do figure it out and they can keep Hutson on power play 2, there is a benefit that Hutson alone makes power play 2 a viable, dangerous unit. And, but he's not going to stay there forever. When is the appropriate time to put him on power play 1? I don't know, but it's not going to happen after 2 games. I'd be shocked. He might make me look stupid on Saturday. I don't know, but I don't think it's going to happen after 2 games.
Well, I think it's the same pressure. You don't want to lose your veterans either, and have such a short leash for no reason. It's the same idea that I expect the first line to be back together. You have to give a legitimate chance to these guys to figure it out by themselves and say, okay, you are well aware of how things played out in the first 2 games in the way that, your individual and collective game was. I don't need to explain it to you in great detail. You're aware of it, so go and fix it. Do your best to fix it. He's going to give them that chance in every facet of the game.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about, I wrote about it last night, but it was based on an answer that Marty gave to one of your questions, right?
Yeah.
So when he talked the other day on Tuesday about, you asked him about having one of the youngest teams in the league, right? And he said, well, when you're teaching, it's okay. It's almost better that they be younger because it's easier to learn a language at 3 or 4 or 5 than it is at 20. So that to me was kind of the most honest assessment of where the Canadians actually are as a team. You know, all the discourse in the mix, more competitive, progress, blah 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 blah. That was the most honest. That was the most truthful assessment. This team is a team that is still being taught. They're still learning. As you mentioned earlier, defensive zone play. They spent the bulk of training camp working on their defensive zone, and
Yeah.
it's been a mess through 2 games. They're learning. They're trying to be taught. So, do you think those two things can coexist? That Martin St. Louis is still in more of a teaching role than being a tactician or a bench manager or managing personalities and emotions, like you mentioned, like his goal is. Can that coexist with a team that expects to win more games and expects to compete for a playoff spot?
Well, I think that the tactical aspect and the wanting to win more games it can easily be justified in the sense that the expectations are greater, the level of patience is reduced, and basically what he says is that I'm going to be more demanding with the details of what I'm asking them, because by now they should know. They've been hearing me long enough that we're going to fix some details, but the gist of what I've been teaching them, they should know. So I think that his decisions and his actions in game can coexist with the fact that he remains primarily a teacher at this point. It's definitely, I think it's definitely a good awareness of where the team is, but it's ironic because at the same time the team is very young. But when I spoke to the players about that theme the other day, Suzuki, Doc, Matheson, they all told me that, yeah, we're young, but we've been together for a while now. And it's their familiarity, and they've been together as a group. They've been together also with Marty. So it's 2.5 years now with that coaching staff, with that message, so and with those teachings too. So even though they're still learning, the fact that they're getting more familiar and they've have experience as a group together, that's what makes them think that, yeah, well, we may statistically be young, but we're not young in the same way than we were when Marty took over, because we've been practicing in a certain direction. We've got a familiarity of that nucleus that's been together for a while now. So I think that's what Marty is working with, and I don't think it's necessarily, mutually exclusive, that he might try to go both ways. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I just, he made that comment on Tuesday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before they played a single game. He was also talking very confidently about how much more connected they are, and all these. He was speaking in very glowing terms of how the team looked. He obviously did not share the opinion of the vast majority of people who watched them give up 48 shots to the Toronto Maple Leafs and have Sam Montembeault perform miracles, and see that as a poor performance, that's a good result with a bad process. He disagreed with that, and he pushed back. I asked him that exact question after the game, and he kind of pushed back on it and said, did we play a perfect game? No, but it was a pretty good game. He repeated it Thursday morning in Boston. We played pretty well last night. Then after the game against Boston, he kind of recognized that, obviously. So is that just a 1-0 win, clouding how the team is at the truth? His truth, the truth of what the game spoke to him, to use all the kind of Martyism cliches. Is that a 1-0 win distorting that truth? It did a 6-4 loss distort some of it? Were they quite as bad as they seemed? Like, it's, to me, I asked him, like Ken Gooley explained some of the D zone priorities they've had, and that's when he mentioned, our big focus is on the house this year, and making sure, not to give up chances from those high danger areas. And so after the game in Boston, I was like, listen, after 2 games, how do you feel you're doing in that? He's like, well, actually in that, I think we're doing pretty well. We haven't given up a lot of great looks from that area of the ice. It's just other things in the D zone, So it's a bit of whack-a-mole, right? Like you hit one thing down and another thing pops up. And this is so it's all well and good. You know, there was a lot of teaching going on in camp. Marty thought a lot of the stuff sunk in, and maybe it did in that sense. Like to my eyes, I felt like they did still give up some looks from the slot. But if it's not as many as last year, and it's hard for me to say one way or the other, but you know, Sam Montembeault said, other than the 6-on-4 at the end of the game against Toronto, I didn't get that many shots from the middle. A lot of them were from the sides. A lot of them were from further up. The one big glove save on Matthews was obviously that came from the house, but you know, in the Pasternak goal against Boston, that came from the house. But you know, Gouli really felt, and I don't necessarily disagree with him, that sort of the lower slot has been well defended and has been challenged when the puck does get in there. They contest shots. But the point being that it's never a linear thing. You're never, when you're teaching, and Marty's learned this numerous occasions, but when you're teaching a young team, you think you have got something nailed down and something else pops up. And when you try to fix that something else, maybe that original thing that you thought you had nailed down is not nailed down anymore. It's a lot of moving parts, right? And so to me, being a coach who's primarily a teacher, and combined with what I mentioned earlier, where even management is looking to gather information from so many players on this team because they don't quite know what they have, doesn't really coexist all that well or smoothly with a team that's looking to be on the outer fringes of the playoff race. It's just, there's just going to be too many lulls in the season when you're in that situation. And there's nothing wrong with being in that situation. The Canadians, I think, are organically in that situation, you know, and they've moved on to another phase of it where we're going to find out what we have in these guys, and we're going to start looking for solutions to things we don't have. Like that's really management's priority now. They're not going to indiscriminately go out and just collect draft picks for the sake of collecting draft picks and collect prospects for the sake of collecting prospects. They're going to try to be more targeted, more calculated, to use another Martyism, but it's, they're going to have specific goals in mind of what they're going to go out and get, because now they're kind of moving into a team building phase. They're trying to build a contending team, while eliminating the holes that they have in the organization. So to me, I think if saying you want to be in the mix is great, and it's great as a strategy entering the season opening golf tournament when the PR department and the marketing department and the owner and the management, and they all get together, like, this is what we're going to say. The reality is that what they should have said is like, we really have no idea what we have here. We're going to use this year to figure out what we actually have, but we've done a good job collecting a lot of assets. We've done a good job collecting. They still have a ton of picks. They have a ton of prospects. Now they got to figure out what they are. And that's the reality.
Yeah, well, I think that message, the whole in the mix thing, is also a message sent to the players, because remember, it was 2 years ago, there was such a discrepancy between the deep interests of management and what was happening at ice level. It was so different, you know, in between the guys wanting to win games versus Kent Hughes that basically was looking at the standings and was hoping for a high pick. And, you know, and they were thinking of, you know, asset management and adding draft picks and whatnot. And I think that when you say we want to be in the mix, it's also trying to reduce the gap between the long-term perspective of management and the very short-term aspirations of the players and the coaching staff. So yes, there is a PR aspect to it, but I think that there's also a way to saying, let's reconcile and make sure that we're all going in the same direction. And we honestly think that we have a group that's now old enough, and we've added some pieces, and we're talented enough that we can be this year's Philadelphia or this year's Detroit or whatever example you would like to take. So is it going to prove itself right? I don't know. I've been skeptical from the start about that, but I think that's how they see it. And I just want to go back to what you were saying, because saying Montembeault after the first game said that the looks were mostly from the outside. According to Natural Stat Trick, it's
Mhm.
not gospel, but still it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
The Canadians gave up 17 high danger chances to the Leafs 5-on-5. 17. And last year, they were giving on average 9.8 high danger chances per game at 5-on-5. So it's ironic, because Montembeault had told me the day before, if I'm just going by the training camp, the 5-on-5 play in our zone, the defensive play, we did not give much during preseason. We didn't give too many shots. We've done a better job at that. We've done a better job at that than last year. And it goes to show how what you think you've accomplished over training camp, once this regular season starts, it's not the same. And it's funny because after the game, you were talking to Nick, and you quoted Nick in your article when he said, "Let me find it here." He said that I think there was a lot of energy used up last night. It's
Yeah.
always tough to play back-to-backs, especially the first two games of the season, and some of us have not played in a while. So after all that's been said about this training camp, this wacky training camp, about the fact that, is it relevant to have training camp games anyway, preseason games? I realized that Suzuki's line, they had two preseason games together, and they look out of sync at this point.
Yeah.
Either out of sync or overmatched, but clearly not at the level where they left off last year and at the level that they expected to be at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's funny. Like, it was kind of the opposite. So after talking to Suzuki, I walked across the room to Gallagher, and I asked him basically the same question. The question that I asked that got that answer to Nick was, when you look at opening the season with Toronto at home and then traveling to Boston the next night and playing the Bruins, and those two opponents in particular with the circumstances around it, is it okay to be satisfied being 1-1, or are the standards that you're trying to change and elevate for this team, is it not okay to think in those terms? Is it not okay to say, well, back to back Boston, And so that was his answer. That's the same question to Gallagher, and he was completely the opposite answer. Like, he was like, he's like, it's funny you're using the word difficult. When the schedule came out, we looked at this and got excited. This was a great challenge, a great opportunity to play meaningful games right off the bat. And so, and that's, honestly, of the two, that's the right way to look at it, is that, great, let's go, let's prove right off the bat who we are, what we can do. And, but the preseason, you need a ramp up to this level to this. And because, Boston and Toronto are in the same boat as Montreal. They're at the same stage in the season. There's nothing different. They have as much rust as Montreal does. They haven't played in a while, like Montreal hasn't, but it's whatever they did in the preseason to get ready for it. I mean, that's what is worth wondering about, the way, and it doesn't just come down to that last game in Ottawa where, Ken Hughes is talking to Steve Stais and who are you dressing and what's going on and this and that. And then both teams decide to leave their best forwards out of the lineup, the best players out of the lineup. Was that an optimal training camp to be ready for these two games? And I mean, I think that top line looks like a top line that hasn't spent a lot of time playing together, even though they spent, and even though they played, the entire second half of last season, even more than that, the last 50 games last season together. You don't just pick up where you leave off several months later. So, I mean, we'll see. Honestly, like, it's, I think Marty thought their training camp was really good. I thought it was strange. I think everyone thought it was kind of strange and not really. It became less a preparation for the regular season and more its own separate weird entity, where these rivalry games were happening, and there was all this threat of violence and everything, and it was just like, you're playing these games to get ready for the season. Like we seem to have lost sight of that in the midst of training camp, and then, I don't know if that's a valid reason for it, but I agree with you that maybe an extra game playing together would have done that Suzuki line some good. We're not gonna know. It's gonna be hard to find out. There's no way to test this theory, but I think there might be some validity to it.
But that training camp was important for Kirby Dach. He looked better at the end of training camp than he did in the first two games. But I think that I trust him to figure things out pretty quickly. But there are other guys that took it seriously. Josh Anderson wanted to make sure that he could turn the page on last year. And it's just a mindset right from day one when you arrive with your teammates. Yoel Armia, I was curious to see, has he kept the same frame of mind, same positive attitude? And on the morning of opening night, he was like a kid in a candy store, huge smile. He was so happy because a year ago he was in the American League. He did not make the cut for that inaugural game. And you got veterans. You mentioned Gallagher. I mean, Gallagher and Evans, I think they arrived game one ready. Evans has been very good to them. I don't know if it's too early to ask him, but I wonder if down the road, the idea that I'm in a contract year, this is...
Oh, he's been asked. He was asked during training camp.
Okay,
he was actually asked. It was by our colleague, Martin McGuire. He's like, is it too early to ask about your contract? And Jake was like, yes, it is. It's entirely too early. So, but yeah,
I'm sure it doesn't escape him.
Of course it doesn't escape him. I mean, it's just, that's being in the last year of your contract means that it's a year possibility to be moved at the trade deadline. It means that there'll be possibility that you'll be let go and allowed to explore the free agent market at the end of the season. I mean, it would weigh on anyone. It would only be normal. David Savard's in the same situation. Army's in the same situation. So it's like Dvorak's in the same situation. I thought Dvorak was pretty good against Toronto, less so against Boston. But yeah, it's reality. And the reality is, I mean, I don't know how to handicap it, but most or all of those guys are probably not going to be back.
Yeah. You're right.
I think management looks at those guys as freed up money. That's really primarily how they see it. So they have a lot to prove. And I agree, the guys that you mentioned as being ready to play, absolutely. And I think Nick mentioned that against the Leafs after the Leafs game. Suzuki said, I thought tonight our depth really showed. And that's the strength of our team, is our depth. And so as the top line guy and the captain and the guy who represents the strong link portion of this team, for him to say the strength of our team is the weak link guys is pretty self-aware, I think. On Nick Suzuki's part, because he said it right from that charity event he held for the service dog organization, Foundation? The service dog. What's it called? Amira?
No, it's not Mira. It's I don't know. I don't want.
Sorry, Nick. Sorry to the foundation people. But anyhow, the Service Dog Foundation said it right then. Said our depth, we have among the deepest. I think he meant forward groups. He said teams, but I think we have among the deepest forward group in the league, and he firmly believes that. So, let's move on to it's Future Friday.
Oh yeah, because we're gonna keep our segments, huh? So
yeah,
we might have moved to Substack, but our loyal listeners know that we've got this tradition of Future Friday every Friday, and then the Monday mailbag. Guess which day of the week. So speaking of the Monday mailbag, I've already started in the chat on BasuandGodin.com. So there's a thread in the chat, so you can just put your questions for Monday mailbag in there. My phone has been buzzing quite a bit, so I know that there's already a few messages that I've entered in the meantime. But it is Future Friday, and with Future Friday comes the jingle. There's going to be an animation down the road, but at least our good friend Greg McPherson, who we thank for our opening jingle, the Future Friday jingle and the Monday mailbag jingle, all three of them. So thank you, Greg. We continue to use your
Yes.
awesome material.
Yes. We have kept
Yeah.
we have kept it all because it's so
for
great.
sure. So here we go. Future Friday.
Got like a downbeat vibe to it. I like it.
Future Friday.
So today,
Yes.
I mean, we have to go to Russia, right?
If only
gotta
we
go
could.
to
But
Huh?
I would go. I would go if we could go to Russia.
You
I
would
would
go?
go to go see what's going on over there.
Man,
So yeah, there's a lot of consternation about what's going on with Ivan Demidov. I think the Canadians also have some. They are looking not like you and everyone, but with far more interest, obviously. So Ivan Demidov, last 4 games, time on ice. October 3rd against Dynamo Minsk, 407. October 5th against Severstal, 322. October 7th against Lokomotiv, 531. Most recently, October 10th against Dynamo again,
Dynamo Minsk. Yeah.
317. So that is 5 consecutive games at less than 10 minutes of ice time. 3 of those games were at under 5 minutes of ice time. Not optimal. I understand people, Roman Rotenberg has been trending among Canadians fans on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I think it's somewhat justifiable, but it's also the reality of the KHL. It's really, the Canadians can't do a whole lot about it. And there are other factors involved. The fact that this kid's leaving at the end of the year and he has made it known to everyone and everyone knows it. Everyone's waiting for him to just be out of there. Traditionally, Russian teams, and more specifically, this Russian team, does not like playing kids in that situation. And so I think the Canadians were aware of that reality. I think the hope was that Demidov would be so dynamic, and this could still happen, that he would be so dynamic that they would say, okay, well, at least he'll help us win this year.
Yeah.
So let's play him. And that's not happening so far. So is there a cause for panic, Mark Bateman? Do you feel like, should people be panicking?
No.
So I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out.
You know what? Is it? You know what? It's a rhetorical question. Is it time to panic? I've rarely encountered a situation where the answer was yes. It's time to panic.
It doesn't
Very
stop
rarely.
people from panicking, because the problem is that
I know.
people don't actually ask the question. Is it time
No,
to
they
panic?
don't. They just panic.
They just go straight
They
to
just
panicking.
panic. But
If you
I
have
mean,
time to
it's
ask the question, then maybe you could
Yeah.
avoid the panic.
exactly. It puts
Yes.
things in perspective. But it's crazy though, because he was the rookie of the month in the KHL in
Yes.
September.
Yes.
8 points in his first 10 games. And then calendar switches to October and poof, 16 minutes in 4 games. That's crazy. And it's not like Ska's a juggernaut this season, is Kuznetsov, their big off-season acquisition. He's missed some time with an injury, but he's not lit the world on fire.
No.
Mikhail Grigorenko, the oldest 30-year-old I've known in hockey.
Is he 30 already? Oh, honestly, is he now actually 30? Because he looked 30 when he was 18, but is he actually 30
Well,
now?
that's it. Yeah, he's 30 now. It's
He's 30. Oh my God, that blows my mind. Holy cow.
Yeah, I know. So he has not. He's not exactly a star. He's got a pedigree, but he doesn't look like the difference maker that he should be for Ska. So you mentioned 317 against Minsk. So Thursday, at some point, it's 4-1 for Minsk. There's 8 minutes left in the game, and Rotenberg pulls the goalie. So the Dynamo gets a penalty, and Ska scores, obviously with the man advantage. I think he was even a 5-on-3. And all this time, Demidov did not touch the ice. So earlier in September, he was used pretty frequently in the bumper position. But now, I mean, there's clearly something where Rodenberg says, no, he's not playing. You mentioned the fact that guys who made it clear that they were leaving at the end of the season tend to not play a whole lot. A few years ago, if you remember, Alexander Romanov, he had made his
100%.
intentions clear.
Yeah.
And he was used in similar fashion. He was regularly like a 7th D. But the irony here is that, because there's a lot of people who made the comparison with Matvei Mishkov. And Mishkov, while in the previous 2 years, at least he benefited from a loan to Sochi. And he got to play a lot in Sochi. But according to KHL rules, you can't loan a player who's in the final year of his contract. So either they demote Demidov to the juniors, and I don't think it'd be much better because he outplayed that circuit by a mile, or you hope
for
to
2
the day
years.
or you hope that at some point, based on the fact that SKA right now is barely a 500 team, Rotenberg won't have any choice but to look at his kid and say, all right, time to help us again, but there's so much that must escape us also in the goings on that team. We're not covering them, and we're not around to even understand the language. But anyway, it's there's clearly other factors, and that guy is straight out of a novel. Roman Rotenberg, he's not a career coach. He's like he comes from a family, an oil family of an oligarchs. If I'm not mistaken, either he or his father is on the sanction list in the U.S.
Yes,
Very murky.
That's true. Yeah. And so, anyhow, it's SKA's next game is Saturday against my favorite KHL team, just because I like the name, Avtomobilist from Ekaterinburg. Ekaterinburg, I think I'm saying that wrong, but anyhow. So we'll see
That
what
would be
happens.
the first time that you name a Russian team the wrong way.
It would not be. No, I think I named them wrong more often than I named them right. But anyhow, so that's coming up Saturday. So if you want more reason to panic, check that out and see what the ice time is for Ivan Demidov. But in all legitimacy, this is not trending in a way that the Canadians like. I think that there's some legitimate concern over there about what's going on with his ice time. Is it concern enough for them to like step in and try and intervene or try and work out some sort of alternate solution? I don't know that to be the case. But if it continues, I think the Canadians might get a little bit more proactive, because right now, and not right now, generally they're very respectful of the fact that SKA St. Petersburg is its own thing, its own team. They're doing what they can to compete, and they can make their own decisions. The Canadians have no influence and no right to influence what they do in a professional hockey league over in Russia. So, but there is a good amount of concern.
I think that they
maybe
knew
your panic is justified.
I think that they knew that there was a possibility that it could happen, because it has happened so many times before. Yes. And it was in drafting Demidov, it was just a risk that they were willing to take. It's 1 year. It's not great. It's certainly not ideal, but if they try to intervene, God knows what could be the effect over there. If they just don't get involved and let things play out, maybe it might serve everybody better. We'll see about that. Just a side note quickly, SKA, they've been giving up a lot of goals, and they've replaced their backup goalie, and now Yegor Zavragin, the Flyers' third-round pick last year, who was on loan to Sochi, is now in net for SKA. And then Yevgeny Volokin, the Montreal Canadiens prospect, he's been promoted from the MHL, and now he's been traded to Sochi. So he's going to.
I was not aware of that. Okay,
yeah.
Interesting.
So now he's going to play in the KHL. I don't know if he's going to be a starter or a backup there, but he's been traded to Sochi, and his two-way contract runs until May 2027. So
Interesting.
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. So everybody, let us remind you that until for the rest of the month of October, obviously we'll have our 2 episodes a week, Monday and Friday. And starting in November, the Monday episode will only be available to those who subscribe to our Substack. So it's going to be behind a paywall. You can get all the details and all the plans that are offered on our website at BasuandGodin.com. So it's under the Substack umbrella. And in the meantime, well, all of our episodes will be available to everybody, including on YouTube. But after that, obviously, it's only the Friday episodes that are going to be available on YouTube because we're going to keep all of our Monday content for our subscribers. So,
And speaking of subscribers, just want to mention Marc-Antoine and I were overwhelmed by our opening weekend of the Substack being available and knowing full well that there's nothing behind the paywall. There's not even there was until now, there was not even an episode on the Substack. So thank you so much to everyone who has already subscribed. We crossed thresholds that we thought would take months in a matter of days. So thank you so much for the support. Really, really touched both of us. Marc-Antoine did not know how to digest it, frankly. He really had trouble getting his head around it. I did too. I mean, it's honestly it's been really, really great. We appreciate it, and we hope it'll be worth it. We hope what we provide you enjoy, and we will be, as we mentioned when we originally did the Substack, did the announcement, there will be some kind of bonus content for paid subscribers while everything is outside the paywall. So if you have paid to subscribe, it's not for nothing. Marc-Antoine and I will be doing some extra little mini episodes that we will send out specifically to you, not out to the whole world. So you can keep your eyes out, for that in the coming days and weeks until the paywall goes up. Your paid subscription will get you something in the meantime.
That's it. All right. So everybody have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
BasuandGodin Notebook. BasuandGodin